morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I am super excited. I'm always excited about these coffee and conversation events, and I do hope that you have your coffee. Today is going to be terrific. I've got a very special guest. I'll just bring her on the screen here in a moment. Tonille Miller. Tonille Miller has a fantastic organization focused on operationalizing strategy. Now, it's really not enough to execute a strategy. You have to operationalize it. So we're going to talk about what that means and what it means to give employees a great experience. So before I talk about Tonille, I want to bring her on screen. Welcome, Tonille.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And Tonille's joining us from New York City this morning, where I heard it's also cold, as it is here in southern Ontario. So I guess winter is really on its way. That's too bad, but I guess unavoidable. Thanks, Tonille, for being here. Tonille has a great, extensive background in consulting with the Big C consulting firms, a real veteran in that space. She's an organizational psychologist and has her own company, EXT Experience and Transformation. Her work is centered around employee experience and strategy to to drive ultimate performance. So I want to read something that's on her website here. Optimizing the experience our people have with our organizations enables them to be the most productive, engaged, and flourishing versions of themselves. This directly impacts business outcomes, and it's easier than you think. I love that. Easier than you think. So that's where I'd love to start, Tonille. Just share with the audience, we hear a lot about engagement, but what is experience? What is employee experience? Define that for us.
Yeah, I will be happy to. And again, thanks for having me. And I'm really excited about this conversation. Before we talk about experience, I just want to give a little segue in with culture, because that's another one. People talk about engagement, they talk about culture, and those words get wrapped up sometimes in experience, and people are kind of like, are they the same thing? Are they different? So for example, when it comes to culture, that's like the lifestyle of your organization, right? So it's how people interact, it's how things get done, what behaviors they tolerate. That's our culture. And so beyond being a buzzword, culture, it does have teeth, right? It's backed by real quantitative and qualitative data. It's a key component of your employee experience, right? So as a component of the employee experience, the culture is important. It should be relevant. It should be authentic. It should be inspiring, aspirational, yet it provides clarity around your values and expectations. So culture does a lot of work if it's done right. It's an ecosystem, really, right? So it's changing and evolving as your business does, as your people come and go, and as your people change and the size, all that changes the culture almost moment to moment, essentially. So that's the culture piece, and it really will either enable or hinder performance, motivation, productivity, and your business strategy, right? So the choice is yours. And so if you think about that as culture as one part of employee experience. So employee experience, it's not the foosball tables, it's not the free lunch that people think it is. It's actually a very strategic lever that your organization can pull by meeting people's needs and minimizing points of friction. And I'll get into those in a moment. But basically, it enables people to do the best work of their life by removing barriers to that. And again, we can talk about what some of those are. But just like culture, the employee experience is evolving. It's happening all the time, whether you realize it or not. So the reason why this is really important is because you need to be very deliberate about it when you're designing it and you're going and you're implementing it and that sort of thing to get those strategic benefits that we talked about. And so when you think about employee experience, again, as our world has become more connected, personalized, and experiential in nature, like when we're outside of work, we have our apps, everything's, Alexa, all that sort of stuff. It's very similar to your customer experience, right? The employee experience really is the differentiator at this point in time and how the top organizations will attract, engage, and retain the best talent. And again, so employee experience, it's huge, right? So if you think about culture as one part, employee experience is every touch point that you have with people, right? So it's from the very beginning when there's a candidate that might want to join your organization and they're maybe looking on Glassdoor to see what you're all about. That's part of the employee experience. It's like the onboarding, the interviewing, training and development, promotions, to offboarding, and even afterwards, if you have alumni networks, it's every point that matters, or every moment that matters in between. So and it includes things like culture. It includes the physical space. It includes remote/hybrid/platform experience. And especially now, is that is that experience between when I'm in the office/remote, is there continuity between it? Is there equity, right? Is it the same experience? That's very important as part of that employee experience. And again, with the culture, it's like all the things you mentioned earlier, it includes that, and leadership and how we treat people. And then again, with technology and processes, when we talk about friction, if you have really wonky technology, that's a bad employee experience. You know what I mean? Like any clutter, tons of processes, all that outdated stuff, that builds a terrible employee experience. So that in a nutshell is kind of what the employee experience covers.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I've been an executive at the leadership table in my career when I've worked in corporate. And if you follow something like the balanced scorecard strategy framework, talent is one line. And it's usually the HR people who kind of own that line and make sure that things like onboarding are done well, and people are building the capabilities that they need. But it's almost like the whole strategy is designed with people as a silo. And the way you've just described employee experience, it needs to penetrate across this way, right?
Yep.
Horizontally across every single component of the strategy.
Yeah, it is. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and so let's kind of move into that, unless you wanted to add more to that. Let's move into this idea of operationalizing a strategy. That's different from just executing a strategy.
Yep, it is. It certainly is. And I guess the way that I think about it is because I've kind of worn two hats in my career, and they both lend themselves to each other, and we'll talk about them now. But one would be the employee experience hat, and one would be the change management hat, right? And when you think about the guiding principles of successful change management and successful employee experience, there are a lot of the same principles and a lot of the same things. It's basically just taking almost like a different lens. And so when I think about operationalizing strategy, how do you do that? Let's say that you have these 5 strategic priorities this year as your business grows and things like that. To make them happen, you need to work backward and say, okay, so if I want these 5 strategies to be executed, what skills and capabilities do I need, right? What technology or maybe automation strategy do I need? Like, what are the processes? What are the things in the organization that we need to drive those strategies? And then when it comes to the people side of that, you got to walk it back even further. If I want my people to drive this strategy, what do they need from me? What do they need from the organization in order to be successful and operate optimally, right? And that's where the employee experience work and the good change management, when it's done right, when that comes in, that enables them. So that really operationalizes the strategy through the people if they're done right. So if you want, I'd be happy to touch on kind of like, I have some guiding principles that I would say for good employee experience and some guiding principles for good and change management. If you'd like,
well, let's save that for just a couple more minutes, because I want to come back to one thing that you said that is fascinating. Mm-hmm. Did you say, let's say you have 5 strategic priorities?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So not 30, not 20, 5's probably kind of hitting the limit.
Well, you would think so. However, in the world we're in these days, things are moving very quickly. And I see organizations, no matter what size they are, especially when they're larger, but even the smaller ones, they may have 30, they may have 50. And that's the trick too. And to your point, I think what you're hitting on here is it's called prioritizing, right?
Right.
You need to pick the top ones and don't make it top 30. It's like the top 5 or the top 3, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so I'm assuming that whatever those strategies are, somehow it all has to come together this way. Mm-hmm. It can't just be these separate and disparate ideas.
Well, and unfortunately, what you just hit on is one of the biggest problems with actually achieving the strategies and executing the strategies, is because usually there's silos and different teams, and maybe marketing has these top priorities, and finance has this one. And lots of times, as you can imagine, no, left hand is not speaking to right hand. And so what's happening is these guys are driving this and this driving. And when you think about it, let's say there's people in the organization, right? If they're being hit from all avenues all the time from different changes, and this is happening, and this, goes against that and whatever, they don't know what to do. So that is really, this is so great. You're hitting on such a big bump in the road here when it comes to managing strategies and operationalizing it and change. And so to address that, the good organizations, they will have, no matter how large they are, you need to have almost like a central body in the organization where all the strategic priorities, everything that you're trying to drive that year is prioritized from leaders. And it's literally funneled through this central area who has a vantage point against all the people in the organization and all the technology and everything that's going on, so they can push back. And one of the firms that I used to work for did this very well. And that's how they were able to execute so well and operationalize the strategy so well, because they actually would push back. If there was too many changes coming to this particular group, this particular quarter, or things, things of that nature that were going against each other, they would push back and say, you know what, this one over here needs to be put, a couple months later. This one maybe is for next year. Maybe we won't do this one at all, that type of thing. But that is a very rare capability in an organization.
Yeah. And, again, I've sat through so many strategic planning sessions, and, I've always been quite curious. We're there to do our strategic planning, and yet every department that supports the primary strategy of driving the business. So I've always been in the sales side of the business. Marketing comes in and presents their strategy. Product comes in and presents their strategy. Client operations comes in and presents their strategy. And we say, well, thank you very much for those beautifully built out strategies. Now let's us build our strategies. And it's like, isn't that backwards? Like, what is happening here? And, yes, people get busy, and it's a lot to manage. And I'm assuming it's become even more challenging to manage with everybody remote. So there's no such thing as everybody in the last 2 years, everybody getting in a room for a couple of days. So that just becomes that much more of a challenge. I don't want to make this conversation about the pandemic, but if you could just touch on how much more challenging it has become, I think that would be helpful.
Definitely. I think what I would say, being somebody who's been able to work successfully remotely for about a decade, on and off, I mean, for the most part, minus travel and things like that, I actually wouldn't say, even though most people would agree with you, I totally get it. Most people who hadn't had that experience would definitely say, oh my gosh, if we're not on an offsite for 3 days together, this is going to be impossible. But I actually don't think that's the biggest hurdle. I don't even think it's that big of a hurdle if you do it right. I think with the use of technology and the way of doing these things, you could actually probably have a better situation because you design it deliberately. You design your offsite virtually, deliberately, and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't even go there. What I would say, though, is that because right now there's so much uncertainty, and it's the second we think that we have more certainty, like, oh, we got a vaccine, great. Oh, no, now there's more variants. So I think that would be actually the biggest hurdle right now during the pandemic, would be the fact that everything is so uncertain. Nobody knows what to do necessarily because we've never been through this before. And so I think that's actually become the biggest hurdle for this type of thing.
Okay, that's interesting. And that's one of the reasons I love this show, is because I'm always learning something, and that's fantastic. So, okay, so let's start talking about operationalizing a strategy. No, one more thing before we go there. So employee experience. Leaders love to think about their employees and what their employees need to do. What is it that leaders need to do? Growth mindset, culture of innovation, all this stuff. We can let people make mistakes, but what is it that the leaders themselves need to do? What do they need to model for a strategy to drive performance?
Great question. And it's so funny because I think you and I have both been on so many projects. The work that we do, we're brought in because, to your point, I need a culture of innovation, or I need this to change, or I need that to change. And the number one thing we always hear is, I don't have the right people, or my people need to change. My people need to do something. We're brought in to make people change their behaviors. That's why they bring us in, right?
Right.
Yeah. And to your point, hey, by the way, the leader needs to actually start changing their behavior first. They can't just like go to the store and buy a change management program and tell them we want people's behaviors to change. Actually, they have to do it first. And so there's a lot of things that leaders can be doing, but what I would be coaching is when I come in to drive any kind of change or whatever they're looking to do, I actually take it backwards, right? So instead of saying, I want to change my people to use this new platform, it's called, well, we want this new platform because it'll help us drive this new strategy, which is great. What do we need people to do? Like, what do we need them to do differently to use this platform? And then back it up from there. What do they need from us in order to want to do that, use that platform, in order to know how to use the platform, in order to be compelled to use the platform, like all these different change levers we can pull. And guess what? To your point, leaders are the leading, they have to start. And so if you think just like from a change perspective, it's like leaders have to come up with a compelling vision. I'm sorry, but just the fact that this new platform will save the leader, 10 times, what they're paying today on X, Y, or Z. People don't care about that. If I'm an average person in the company, I don't care. No, so what has to happen is we need to actually say, that's a great business case. But in addition to that, how about let's think through, if I'm the average employee, why do I care about this change? How does this impact me? What's the benefits to me? Break it down really granularly to that person. And this is, again, kind of putting on the employee experience hat, looking at it through their eyes with empathy and saying, okay, so what do they care about, right? Like how is it going to benefit them? So that's the thing. Leaders need to be doing these things first and then also role modeling it. This is just like parenting. When I think about leaders in organizations, it's just like parents and kids at home, right? And not that we're calling employees kids, we're not, but the dynamic is similar. If I see a leader doing something, then I'm more compelled to say, oh, okay, yeah, that looks like something, they're walking the talk. I would be open to doing that, or they just naturally observe that. If a leader's, talking out of both sides of their mouth, they're not role modeling, they're not walking the talk. That's the last thing I think I'm going to be doing as an average employee. So that's really important, I think, for leaders to do that. And then to answer your question about when leaders say, hey, I want a culture of innovation, or I want, this and that, they need to realize, and they should bring people like us in or other practitioners to guide them, because I don't think they understand that in order to have a culture of innovation, for example, because this is the buzzword, you need to have a major amount of psychological safety. You need to have, we hear that word, but leaders don't really know what that means. You're like, what does that mean? People can do what? There's science that goes into it. It's not that hard to do, but you have to do it. So it's simple, but it's not easy, if that makes sense. So, so for innovation, there's that. It's things like pulling levers where, we have a culture of failing fast and not failing, but, experimenting is what I would call it, not even failing. And leaders have to actually demonstrate that. So for this example, if I'm a leader, I have to be willing to be vulnerable in a meeting and say, hey, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but I'll find out. Or we'll find out together. I have to be able to say, hey, you know what? It's all right. As long as you learn something from that experiment that you did there, not a big deal. We'll move on to the next one and share the learnings. And so leaders have to be it's literally leadership's job now is different, right? Not that we're getting on the leadership topic, but back in the day, a leader's job was like, usually they were the most senior, tenured expert at something. And that's how they kept getting promoted. And then they were the leader, right? Or they were the CEO, and that's because they were an expert. Not the case anymore. Leaders are not coding. They're not building software. They're not engineers anymore. They're hiring amazing people that do this. So a leader's job now is not to sit on a throne and pretend they're an expert. The leader's job is to facilitate that greatness in others and unleash them. And again, to our points, really and optimize their experience so that they can actually bring their best self to work and do the best work of their lives for the company. And so leaders need to really realize that their job has shifted and changed a lot if they want their organizations to operationalize the strategy the way that they would like it to be.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, bringing forward the best in others is the job of the leader. So there's a concept: lead from the front, lead from behind, lead from beside. It's not you're setting a vision, you're setting a tone. People are watching you and observing you. And from those observations, they're deciding whether or not they can trust you and want to follow you. But it's not always your job as a leader to be at the front. Sometimes it's your job to literally be behind. And, it's not a new concept. I mean, Henry Ford was the famous quote, ask me any question, I'll get you the answer. Yeah. Because I hire great people.
Right.
The bastardization of his quote, but just to the story. All right. We've got about 10 minutes left. So let's start talking about those principles.
All right. So
Yeah.
I would say, the guiding principles for a good employee experience would be number one, removing any points of friction. And how do you do this? You can journey map your people. You could do focus groups, right? You kind of walk through like their day-to-day and their touch points with the technology, touch points with process, their manager, with the organization in any format, finding out what those touch points are, what are the pain points, what are the points of friction that make it just like that much extra work to get something done. Again, wonky technology, processes, managers, these are the big ones that we hear. So removing any of that you can, number one. The second one is really, really big, and Netflix does this really well. There's a couple other organizations like that are very successful that do this well. And what that is treating people like owners, which is like adults. If anyone knows Ray Dalio of Bridgewater, he really said that transparency rids hierarchy. And so the first principle of treating people like owners is being transparent as an organization, as a leader. Make sure that people know how the business is doing. Don't hide the numbers from them. Don't hide the competitor data. Let them know like they are actually one of the owners of your company, right? To work with you, how it works, what they do contributes to it, that sort of thing. So transparency would be one. Another one would be clarity and accountability. Again, really making sure that people at every level, not just the leadership team, are clear about what they're expected to do, what success looks like, what the potential rewards are for that, and or how they'll be held accountable, and how they'll be held, supported as well, and ensure every person at all level, again, knows the business strategy, right? Because how can I drive a business strategy for you if I don't really know what it is, or where we're going, or why we're going, or why should I care? Like these kinds of things, have everybody be aware of that so they can all drive it together, because then everybody's driving it like an owner versus just 7 people on a leadership team. The next one would be co-creation / feedback and listening to your people. And this is, again, another change management principle, is really bringing people in to co-create changes and things and policies, whatever, with you, getting their feedback, see what they have to say. I'm not saying you have to take everyone's opinion. What I'm saying is listening to them. It's a big deal, especially with the younger generations, because they grew up in we grew up in a world where, their parents were asking them their opinion and saying like, hey, what do you want to eat for dinner? And everywhere they look now in life, everything is very hyper personalized, very experiential, and they're always getting asked their opinion. So they grew up in a world where they are consulted, and then they go to work and they're treated like little kids. So that's a real disconnect if you don't have that piece right. And I think the fourth part of treating people like owners would be having a very high level of flexibility and autonomy. So this is even before the pandemic, flexibility where you work, how you work, especially now though. And then the autonomy is the non-micromanagement, right? I know this is very hard for leaders to believe that people could possibly be working if you're not staring at them sitting in a chair in front of you. But guess what? They weren't working those whole 12 hours anyways when they were in the office. They were on Facebook and doing other stuff with people, and that's great. But the point is, now they're still working, and they've proven over the last year and a half or so that they are even more productive. So stop micromanaging. That's a big one here. And I think those are the main ones as far as treating people like owners. And then I think the third part, as far as employee experience, there's a book that came out a little bit ago by Vishen Lakhiani, and it's called The Buddha and the Badass. And he has this amazing line in there about how, work, if it's done right, really creates the ideal system for meeting people's basic human needs, like really helping them actualize all their potentials, right? So when you think about Maslow's hierarchy, you have safety and belonging and, paying your bills and all that at the bottom. Then you have self-esteem, you have self-transcendence, you have self-actualization. And so work can provide that structure. And this is something that I love so much. So you're having, if you have psychological safety, you have connection and belonging, again, significant self-esteem that comes from the recognition piece, and that doesn't cost anything. You don't have, it can be rewards, but it can just be recognizing the work that people are doing. And then also really helping your people. And this is another really big job of leaders, I think, right now, is connect the dots for your people so that they see that every little task they do, even if it seems menial or not or big, see how it impacts the others on the team, how it may impact customers, perhaps, how it impacts the organization, how it impacts the world or the community. If you can make those direct ties, that's a really big way to build meaning and purpose in there as well. And then, of course, growth, development is important. And like I said, meaning, purpose, and all that. So those, I think, are the key pieces when it comes to a really good employee experience.
Oh, that's fantastic. What did you say the name of the book was? Buddha and the Badass?
Buddha and the Badass by Vishen Lakhiani. Yep, it came out, I think, like a year ago, but just a great read.
I've got my book that I have to buy today. One of the things you said really reminded me of another book called Skip the Line by James Altucher.
Oh.
And he does the research. I don't know where he found his numbers, but he said that people, generally speaking, spend an hour and a half a day looking for another job.
Right now, or this is before now, right?
Well, he wrote the book in 2020, so it was at the beginning of the pandemic.
But before the Great
And
Resignation.
now you've got, the Great Resignation, so I'm sure that's even risen. So,
Yeah.
on average, I think people, an 8-hour day really equates to about 4 hours of productive work.
Mm-hmm.
Making
We just let people do
sandwiches
that.
making sandwiches takes like an hour.
Yeah.
And water cooler chit chat actually was only about 15 minutes. It's anything to do with food, social media, and looking for something more meaningful in life
And this
is
doesn't
what
even
people
count your
really
commute.
spend their work days doing.
Right. And then think about the 2 hours or 1 hour of commute each way as well, right? Think about how much of our lives we had been wasting.
I know. And so that's something. I mean, we've only got a couple minutes left, but so I guess we can't really go down that path. But why is it that everybody is feeling like they're working longer when they don't even have that, like their day could be more productive? They don't have a 2-hour commute or a 3-hour commute or whatever that might be. They don't have a half an hour commute if they live around the corner from the office.
Yeah.
And yet work seems to have expanded into these 12, 15, 16-hour days.
Yeah. There's two things that come to mind that I'll share with you. Two very important things here.
Yeah.
Number one, I forget who the psychologist was, but there's an old study that was done that basically said, things take as long as you have or something like that. So for example, if you have, 10 hours, you could make it your task take 10 hours, or if you really wanted to get done in an hour, and then, you know what I mean? I'm kind of butchering this, but I think part of it is that, when I was younger, I always thought, okay, so, when you have all these chores at home and your mom's like, hey, if you get your chores done, you can go out and play, right? You get those chores done very quickly because you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna go play. So those chores, they're done, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. But if my mom were to say something like, well, you've got to stay in the house all day to get your chores done, and then you can go out and play at like 5 o'clock, regardless of when your chores are done, I'm gonna take all day to get those chores done. So I think part of it is just like that piece. And if we told people you're measured more on the productivity and what you're getting done, not the hours in the chair, I think that would change drastically, number one. And number two, I think the other part is leaders need to lead right now and not be putting Zoom calls on your calendar for 12 hours a day just because they know you're not commuting. So leaders and the people in the culture need to actually be role modeling, doing a better job role modeling this, I think, because I hear stories from everyone. Oh, we've got calls from like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. because they know I'm not in a car or I'm not on the train. No, we're not doing that. That's not, you're not getting paid more. You're just getting more burnt out, and we need to stop it.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. We could talk all day, but we can't. I mean, we can go offline and we can continue. But my promise is to keep these to a half an hour, really a coffee break. So let me just switch slides here so that people know how to get in touch with you. So everybody who's here probably knows who I am. But Tonille, your email is here, and check out experienceandtransformation.com. Tonille, it's been an absolute pleasure having you be my guest this morning. I hope our audience has been furiously writing notes. And, the invitation is there. Please reach out. This is important work if you're a leader. And by the way, if you're an employee, this is important. Share this with your leaders.
Tell them to give us a call. We'll help them.
Exactly. They need to hear this, and they need to be role models for the company. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thank you, Tonille. And we will see you in 2 weeks' time with my friend, Ben Larkey from Australia, talking about how to scale an organization, not just grow an organization, but what does it mean to scale your organization? So that'll be on November 17th. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.